Do you want to save money at the grocery store, eat more organic, whole foods, cultivate food security, and feel more connected to the earth? If so, then growing your own food is a no-brainer. You wouldn't believe how many people come to me claiming that they can't grow their own food. They think they don't have enough space, that they're too busy, or that they simply don't have what it takes. Perhaps you've fallen for one of these gardening myths. If you think you can't grow food, or if you think the only food that you have access to is what you buy in the grocery store, I have a life-changing webinar that you need to see. It's free and will help you unearth your inner gardener. I've helped thousands of people just like you learn to grow their own food, and I'm speaking from my own experience when I say that with the right knowledge in place, there is no such thing as a black thumb. With this webinar, you can begin making your garden dreams come true and start growing delicious, nutritious food for your family. Just text GARDEN to 44222 or go to iwanttogarden.com and you will receive our free webinar about the 7 key factors you need to know to grow your own food. Remember, that's GARDEN to 44222 or iwanttogarden.com.
You're listening to the Urban Farm Podcast, your partner in the Grow Your Own Food revolution. Whether you've just been introduced to urban farming or you're a lifelong advocate, we're sure you'll leave feeling more informed, equipped, and empowered to dig deeper into the soil of your local food economy. With you every step of the way, here's your host, Greg Peterson.
Today on the Urban Farm Podcast, we have Ben Raskin to talk about community gardening and his new book, The Community Gardening Handbook. Ben has been working in horticulture for more than 20 years and has been with Soil Association in the United Kingdom since 2006. His own experience includes running a walled garden in Sussex, which supplied a Michelin-starred restaurant, and working for Garden Organic at their gardens in Kent. He also set up and ran a 10-acre horticultural production at Daylesford Organic Farm before moving to Welsh College of Horticulture as commercial manager. Ben also works on a large range of other projects, and over the years, these have included working as Horticultural Advisor and founding board member of the community farm near Bristol, and running a program of biochar trials with organic growers. He is currently managing a new agroforestry planting on Helen Browning's farm near Swindon. He is also a board member of the Community Supported Agriculture Network UK and committee member of the Organic Growers Alliance. With all of this experience, he also has authored and written the Community Garden Handbook, which we're going to talk about today, and 2 family gardening books titled Grow and Compost. Welcome to the show today, Ben.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. From all the way across the pond. You're coming in from where?
From a place called Malmesbury in the southwest of England.
Oh, nice. Nice. So I shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at now?
Yeah, absolutely. I first came to gardening actually through food. I have 2 parents who were very passionate about food and interested in food, both great cooks. Mm-hmm. And my dad was a very keen gardener, and I was the only child that enjoyed helping him out in the garden. He told me that much later. Uh-huh. And so initially I actually wanted to be a chef, and I worked in hotels, then got slightly distracted by an ancient history degree.
Oh.
And then didn't really quite know what I wanted to do with myself. And I ended up living in Italy, and I met a vineyard owner out there and started hanging out at the vineyard, just partly because of the wine and partly because it was a fun place to be.
Oh, yeah.
So then started working, helping with the harvesting and the bottling, just sort of being outside, working hard. And I thought, actually, I love this. This is great. Still in my head had the thought that I'd set up my own cafe and grow my own vegetables. But actually, the more I got into the gardening side of it, the more I loved that. And so abandoned the late nights of catering world for the slightly more serene world of growing. Mm-hmm. And then came back from Italy, did a 1-year course, and then just got a series of jobs in vegetable growing, fruit growing, and then wanted to move back down to the southwest of England, where my family are from. Was looking actually for some land to start my own enterprise up, really, because I'd got fed up of growing for other people. And while I was looking, a job at the Soil Association came up for a couple of years. I thought, well, that's great. I can do that while I'm looking for land. 10 years later, I'm still there. Working part-time now for them, but and doing bits of growing on the side, so it's quite a nice balance, really, of the two worlds.
Nice. So the Soil Association, that's in the United Kingdom. I looked online at their website and it looks pretty impressive.
We're a good organisation. We've been going since 1946. We're a membership charity, so we've got a lot of public members, but we also have a certification company that certifies organic businesses and farms.
Right.
So we have a real mix of campaigning, practical support, certification work, which makes it interesting. It's interesting organisation. We do sort of some of what the Rodale Institute might do
in the US
with you, but then we do the certification bit as well. So it's a quite a complicated but an interesting organisation.
Nice. Well, I've got you here today because I got a press release in my email inbox a few weeks ago that talked about a new community garden handbook. And when I saw the press release, it's like, oh my gosh, we got to talk to this guy, because I can't tell you how many times a week I get an email from somebody or a phone call and they say, hey, listen, I need somebody to come and farm my yard, or I'm at a school and I need to start a garden here, or I want to start a community garden. And we really have no place to send people. So you wrote the book, The Community Gardening Handbook, the guide to organizing, planting, and caring for a community garden. So let's start with, why did you write it?
So as we've just explained, my background is more commercial, sort of pure commercial horticulture. But I have increasingly become interested in the interface, I guess, between amateur and commercial horticulture, and particularly around the benefits of people coming together to grow. And that's the benefits for the individuals, but also the collective benefit for the community. There's a much less developed community-supported agriculture movement in the UK than there is in the US, and I've been quite involved in that as well. And for me, there's a lot of fear about gardening for people starting it up, and I don't know if it's the same in the States, but here we have traditionally it's been it's an old man's hobby, growing vegetables, right? And it was part of the Second World War, when we were all growing food for survival and dig for victory and all of that stuff. And so until probably 10 or 15 years ago, allotments and community gardens, they would have been much more the domain of older men, and other people would have been a bit off-put by it. There's been a massive increase and a shift towards young families wanting to get involved and younger people getting interested in gardening, almost becoming a bit cool again. But actually, a lot of people don't really know what they're doing. They haven't had that teaching experience from their parents, perhaps. So they take on an allotment, perhaps on their own, or they have their own garden at home, and they do a couple of things. Maybe they have one or two failures, as we all do, and they get put off and they give up, and they say, oh, well, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm going to give up.
Right. I hear a lot, I have a brown thumb.
Yeah. But equally, they still need to eat, so they still go and buy their vegetables, but they haven't necessarily made the connection between what they're doing at home and what professional farmers are doing. They think of it as something quite different, whereas actually it's really the same. It's just a question of scale. Community gardening and community-supported agriculture, I think, helps to bring those two worlds together and allows less experienced people to gain confidence and learn, but it also brings people, members of the community, together around other things. And often, as I'm sure you find that from that gardening, other things come up and friendships arise. And so apart from the food that's being produced, there's benefits to health, to mental well-being, all those other range of things that doing things as a community and gardening in itself can bring. So that was kind of my driver. And I realized that there wasn't really something out there. The Soil Association actually ran a project on community supported agriculture, which is the sort of slightly commercial end of community gardening, as it were.
Right.
And some of the information we were collecting through that made me realize that there wasn't much out there for anybody. And part of it is the scaling up bit. So
yes.
even where you've got really good gardeners who've been doing it in their garden for years, you suddenly say, oh well, actually now you've got to do a quarter of an acre or half an acre, and they go, oh my god, I don't know how much to plant.
Right.
And suddenly the fear sets in. Do I need new equipment? Do I need, so there's that element as well. And I think often it is just a confidence thing, and it's bringing
yes.
people in with some more experience or a different experience that can help implement things.
So the book, how do you have it broken down?
So what we decided to do was just really sort of inspire people at the start. So hence the first section is taking a few amazing community gardens from around the world, showing in a way the breadth and range of what it could be. And I think whatever you imagine a community garden to be, you've probably only imagined half, at most, of what it might be.
Right.
And when you realise and interestingly, it means different things in different countries.
Oh yes.
So I think we can all take inspiration from what other countries have done and how they see it. So that was the first bit, and then I wanted to take people through the sort of the two bits of setting up an actual garden, and particularly if it is on a larger scale than you might have been used to before. So there's some real practical stuff about irrigation and cultivation and things like that, but also the community bit. And community gardening, it's the community's the first word. So having that community or building that community around a garden is as important as the garden. Otherwise you might just as well go off on your own and do it. And so I wanted to try and explore some of the challenges and the opportunities of bringing a group of people together to achieve building that dream, I guess.
Wow, cool. So I'm thumbing through your book. So if you're hearing pages turning, it's because I'm just voraciously consuming your book, and I'm in the first section right now, and it's like, wow, an introduction to community gardening, and you have got community gardens. There's all over the world. Let's see here. There's Germany that you visited. There's Spain. Australia, Japan, USA.
I would love to say I'd visited them all. I visited some, and the Spanish one I did go to.
Yeah.
As I was researching for the book, it became actually really difficult to choose which ones to put in.
Because there's so many of them?
Just so many.
Oh,
yeah.
Nice.
And so you go, oh, that's a great one. I'm going to put that, I'm going to include that one. And then you do a bit, oh no, but there's another one down the road that's just as good, So actually it made me realize how much is going on. And I mostly had been involved in the UK before that. So I wasn't that aware of some of the things that were happening further afield. But through the research, it made me realize quite how much was going on.
Great. So one of the ways to tell a story around in this topic, community garden, is to give examples of it, which you've done a beautiful job, it looks like. Then the next section, it starts to delve into actually how to do it.
Yeah, and really I'm quite a practical person. I come from it. I'm sort of one of these people that when you start talking about it, I actually just start doing it. I don't enjoy sitting around talking about how you might do things.
Let's just get it done.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes that means I don't think quite hard enough before I do things. But equally, it does mean that I sort of get into it. So I wanted to give some of that real practical detail. whether it's around, the legal side of land tenure, or, how to organize a meeting, some of that stuff that sometimes seems obvious, but if you haven't considered it, you might not even think that it's relevant.
Right.
And certainly through so one of the big projects that I was involved in was setting up what we called the community farm, and it's near Bristol, again in the southwest of England. It was actually quite an ambitious project, growing on about 20 acres, and it was designed to link up some of the people who lived in the city of Bristol, which is a city with a population of around 700,000 people. We were actually based about 9 miles outside that, near a beautiful village overlooking a lake, but the local community at the time were not that engaged, and so our link was through to this urban centre.
Yeah.
And one of the things we did, we brought together this fantastic group of people to set it up. And say in the book, we had a lawyer, we had a health worker, we had a teacher, we had a retailer, we had the farmer who was renting us the land, we had a local food advisor. So we had this really great bunch of people with a wide range of experience, and it made everything so much easier having that group of people. And I had been used to working either for myself or with, say, one farm manager, where we would have actually quite similar skills and experience. We were very good at certain things, but actually didn't have a clue about other stuff.
Right.
And suddenly you've got this group of 10 people, and you say, oh, well, actually, you know all about that. I don't even need to think about that side of it. Yeah. I don't need to read acres of legal documents working out what I'm supposed to be doing, because we got someone on the group who's doing that. But equally, working with a group of people is challenging, because you can't just make your own decisions and go off and do whatever you want. You have to do it by consensus,
right? Which
is good, but it's also, can be challenging. And it can be challenging for people who are the sort of people that have the energy and the drive and the vision to set things up. Often they're the people with very strong ideas who don't always want to listen to what other people have got to say. So managing that particularly at the start, I think managing that group is one of the big challenges, and it's something that we didn't always get right at all at the community farm, but we sort of, I think we got better at it as it went on.
Well, and it's it's all this incredible process of getting from here to there.
Exactly.
And experimenting. One of my questions I always ask is about a time you failed, and because that's where our learnings come from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of failure, there's a couple of things. One is actually a growing failure, and one possibly is connected to that community group.
Yeah,
but
we'll get
to that one. Okay,
we'll get there in a little while. Yeah, because I'm still fascinated by this book. I'm still thumbing through it, and so your chapter 2 is extending roots, and I just want to read these topics that you cover in here: share skill events. Seed swap event, community events, legal structures for community enterprises, really important. The legalities, how do you gain access to land, and make sure that you have long-term access to that land.
And that's such a challenge.
Yeah.
Particularly in urban situations where there's often a lot of other pressures on that land.
Yes, exactly. And making sure that you gain long-term access is really important. We recently lost one of our large community gardens here in Phoenix because the property sold. So
yeah, absolutely.
And I get this one a lot, people wanting to start a community garden, but how do you make sure that your project survives? And you cover that. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, and it goes back to that, getting that group to work and to nurturing that group. So it's very easy to bring a group of people together initially with lots of excitement about what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, and you start up, and then it gets a bit hard, or people start personalities clash, or people have different ideas, or even if you haven't got any of that, even if everyone's pulling together amazingly, and again this is something that happened at the community farm, we all just put so much into it. And it's always voluntary. So people have always got their day jobs and their families and whatever other pressures they've got in their life. They're following this vision of setting up this garden. They're putting every spare hour into it. a year or two into the project, they're all burnt out, and the risk is that you don't bring anyone new in. You keep a sort of tight control of what you're doing, and then you all flake out at the same time, and there's no one to take it on. So making sure that you're doing it in a sustainable way, so not taking on too much at a time, it can push the land, but it can also push the group, and it can push your energy. And then making sure that you're always looking to bring new people in with new ideas and new energy, and recognizing as well, particularly for that founding group, when it's time to step back. And that doesn't mean abandoning it or stopping involvement, but actually realizing that you can't do everything. So that's, for me, is one of the crucial bits of giving a community garden a long life, is making sure that you nurture the community group as well as the soil.
Beautiful. So one of the things that I always tell people is that you, in order for a project like this to be successful, you really need to have that one person that is 1,000% committed to it to make it happen. Have you found that's the case?
At least one. Yeah. At least one. I think, you need someone that just pushes everybody else along. Yeah. And whether that's just because they've got the vision or they've got the time sometimes as well, it can depend. But I think usually these things do rely, certainly in the startup phase, on that one person with the drive. And again, it's making sure that as the project develops and matures, that it's not always all on that person, because otherwise it will collapse.
Well, and that's where the community piece comes in.
Yeah.
You've got to bring in that community.
Exactly.
So let's talk about how urban growing or urban farming can play a part in feeding the world.
I'm interested in this debate, and there's a lot of talk in this country, I'm guessing it's the same in the States, of things like vertical farming and the hydroponic opportunities and using every space. My personal view, and it obviously depends on the country and how big cities are and how much land you've got, but my guess is that in most fairly urban countries, the reality is there's not anywhere near enough land in cities to try to feed those cities. So my personal view is that they offer probably a small contribution in terms of actual volume of food towards the whole. Now, for certain people who are very committed and very involved, they might actually get most of their food from a community gardening or an urban gardening situation. But for me, it goes back to that connection and that understanding of food production and food systems. So if you understand what it means to grow a carrot and how difficult it is to grow a carrot well, and not to get any diseases, and to get a carrot every week of the year when you want it, then you have a different perception of the farmer. Yeah. You have an understanding of what that means if your living depends on producing carrots every week for a market. Right. And so it changes the way you think about food, and it changes the way you shop. And we did an evaluation of our CSA project and the people that have been involved in community supported agriculture. And one of the findings that came out that I think perhaps surprised people, but probably shouldn't have done, is that not only did they love being out on the farm and they loved getting their food from the farm and supporting the farmer and all of those things that you would expect, but also they then changed their shopping habits, and they were more likely to buy local food. They were more likely not to go to the supermarket, all of those things. So it changes actually the whole conversation about food supply and about supply chains and about where it comes from. Yeah. And to me, I think that education aspect probably is the most important bit in terms of feeding the world. It gives people a better understanding to make more informed choices about where they get their food.
Once again, it's not just about growing food, because it's really about understanding where our food comes from and how to produce it. And, you're right. It is hard to grow carrots.
Yeah. Well, in some ways it's easy to grow carrots, but to grow the good carrots every week, that's the hard bit, otherwise Otherwise, you end up with lots of food one week and nothing for a month, and that's not great. I mean, as an example, we've got a situation in Bristol where, and again, I mean, this is probably universal, but the cities tend to spring up where there's good soil. And so what tended to happen, certainly in the UK, is you get a city, and then you get around the city, you get the market gardens on the really good soil around the city.
Right.
As the city expands and populations grow, the pressure gets put onto that land. And certainly in the UK, where for the last 30, 40 years, we've become more and more reliant on importing food, less and less importance has been put on that soil. And just north of Bristol, there's a strip of grade 1, so the best horticultural land, going up, they call it the blue finger because on the soil maps the colour of grade 1 is blue, and it's this sort of finger of land that comes up north of Bristol, and it is the most amazing soil. It's beautiful, it's deep, it's just the right texture, it's all the things that you'd want, it's facing the right way. And at the moment Bristol City Council are building park and rides on it and building houses on it, and it's lost forever. And there was a massive demonstration a year and a half, 2 years ago against some of these developments. And the interesting thing is the development, certainly the park and ride, is about relieving congestion and cleaning up the air in the city. So actually something that most of the people that were campaigning would have in principle agreed with, because it was about getting a better transport infrastructure to reduce traffic in the city. But actually, they saw the bigger picture, a lot of them, and realised the threat to this wonderful soil that we'd never get back. Now, as it happened, in the UK, we don't have any legal protection for soil. So they lost and the park and ride is built. For me, it was interesting, the level of the protests. And Bristol is unusual. It's quite a green city, so that wouldn't be replicated everywhere. But I think it showed that growing awareness of the importance of soil and the importance of localized food production. And I think that comes from that connection with food growing.
Yeah, beautifully said. So let's also fold in this notion of edible trees into the city. So you've been involved with some of that.
Well, yeah, and this actually links a bit to some other farming work that I'm involved in, which is around agroforestry and around bringing trees into farming systems. And community orchards are something that have been around for quite a long time, and they're quite a nice concept. They're a lovely place to be. They don't take that much work, so they're actually quite an easy way of creating a community garden. But I'm also then interested in how you change people's perceptions of trees. So when I was at Horticultural College, we were given our list of 15 trees to use in urban design, and the idea of them was that they wouldn't drop their leaves, they wouldn't have messy fruit that people would have to clear up, so they wouldn't be difficult trees, in other words.
Right.
And that to me is such a narrow way of looking at things. And then equally we've got a lot of people who aren't getting access to fresh fruit and veg, but actually we could be having loads of stuff that they could just be picking as they walk past.
Exactly.
So again, and we've started to see it in some places where little corners of parks are being turned into just planting some soft fruit or a few fruit trees. But I'd like to see it as a much more strategic, potentially government-led thing, where actually they prioritize planting edible trees in urban areas, and not just fruit but nuts and all of that whole range of things, so that suddenly they become a resource as well as all the advantages that trees generally bring.
Yeah, I've been a long time supporter of, if you're going to plant something and grow it, spend money and time and energy on making it work, it better be edible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So. And the beauty of it is that most of the edible trees are also great for wildlife and all the other things. So it's not like you have to make a choice. The only choice is that some of them might make the street a little bit messier for a couple of weeks of the year.
Exactly. Yeah, God forbid that should happen.
Exactly.
So, and how do you go about finding land in cities?
It's tough. And again, I mean, I'm not an expert on the situation on your side of the pond, but over here, it's it's just kind of trawling around really. And sometimes it's finding, there are some city councils that are quite proactive. We have a history of some of our counties owning farms, and they used to do it as a way of providing opportunities for new entrants into farming. But with, as you're probably aware, we're on a massive austerity drive in this country, and funding for almost everything's been cut. So the local government is under a lot of pressure, and a lot of them are selling off their county farms. But there is still some land sometimes within city boundaries that can be made available. And again, in Bristol, they're quite proactive in this respect.
Nice.
But other areas can be too. Sometimes, though, you just have to go out and find anything. So there's some quite interesting examples of using building plots and bringing in, whether it's skips and just filling them with soil and growing in a skip, and then when the site gets sold, you pick up the skip and move it to somewhere else. If people want to grow, they find ways of finding land, or even people growing in shopping trolleys and pushing them around. So it depends on the scale really that you want to grow in, and it's looking for just any space, any corner of grass, and often it's a cost to the council or to the city government to manage that, whether it's mowing it or clearing it. So sometimes if you say, actually, our group, our residents in this area are going to take it over, you don't have to worry about it anymore, we'll look after it and we'll use it to grow food. If they've got even a little bit of imagination, and then often they'll let you do that. But you just have to keep asking and keep knocking on doors.
I think that's a big piece of it. Be persistent.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Be persistent.
There was a great initiative in this country which was called, I can't even remember, there was Land Share, I think, or something, where they basically had a website, and you could put up on the website whether you had land to offer or whether you were looking for land.
It's always great to find those land share organizations out there, that is for sure, and especially if there's one in your community, because I know that we always get people looking who have land to share, and I know there's farmers out there that want to do the work. So I'm sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm going to shift on you, and I'd like for you to talk about a time you failed, how you overcame that failure, and what you might have learned from it.
So one of my big growing failures was my first sort of big-ish commercial venture, and I was working on, I say big, it was big for me at the time, but it was a couple of acres. We had a really sort of cold, wet spring, and I was desperate to get my shallots in. And we were working on quite heavy soil, and I was looking at it thinking, no, I don't know. And then I was getting to the end of March. I've really got to get them in. So I said, I'm just going to go in. I'm going to do it. So I went in with the plough, and it was, I did a few rows, and it was just smearing it. And I thought, oh no, I've got to stop. So I planted, say, 3 rows of these things, and then waited a week. And of course, the ground dried out beautifully, and we did another 3 rows and put the rest in. And of course, the ones that we put in later, within about a week, had overtaken that first lot. And that was my really big lesson in patience in growing, and sort of having the confidence really to say, I know it's not right. I may not quite understand why it's not right. I may not have fully articulated, but just you get that feeling that you shouldn't be doing it, and you should just hang on. I've seen it since, time and time again, with other people where for whatever reason there's pressure put on them, whether it's self-imposed or whether it's from the boss or from other members of the community or whatever it is. We think, I should be doing this. I should be seen to be active, and actually being able to hold back and say, no, I'm going to wait for the right time.
Yeah, and that goes to listening to your gut, listening to your intuition, and I guess that really comes from making mistakes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other one on a slightly different scale actually was when we started the community farm up. We talked earlier about having that one person who had the drive and the vision. For us, it was someone called Phil Horton, who's a organic pioneer, retailer, grower. He's one of these people that just inspires you to do stuff. And he had a particular vision of what the farm should be. And initially you get quite carried away by that. Yeah, we can do that. We can take on the land. But actually what it meant was we took on too much land too quickly. We didn't put the effort into fertility building that we should have done. We basically planted too much without quite having the resources to look after it. And the cracks didn't always show immediately. The first couple of years, we had the energy, and we were all, we can do this. And then, the cracks started to show.
Yeah.
And for me, it was a huge lesson just in really mapping out what you really believe is achievable, and then probably even doing a little bit less than that initially.
Yeah.
Because if you do it really well, that's great. Then you can build on it and you can expand the next year.
Yeah.
And part of some of the pressures we had initially at the community farm were purely down to us all being, I think, carried away by this vision that we didn't quite have the resources for.
Yeah.
And that, for me, was a real lesson in sustainable growth, I guess, really.
Yeah. And the sustainable piece, I tell people all the time that if you take on too much and fail, you may not continue. So take on the right amount, be successful at it,
Exactly.
And that drives the conversation bigger. Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's you want that big vision, but you want to get there in the right way. So.
Yeah, exactly. What do you consider your biggest success besides the book that I've got in my hands right now?
Well, the other biggest success probably is the training scheme that we did at the Soil Association, which we call the Future Growers Scheme, which started as a conversation between some of our growers and ourselves. And this was 10 years ago, just after I started at the Soil Association, about the lack of good growers that wanted to come into the industry. And again, we had in the UK, in the 70s, the sort of the hippie growers that left the urban world and went off and founded a whole load of businesses. The good ones of that survived and succeeded. So we've got this real sort of cohort and community of what are now 60, 65-year-old growers.
Right.
I came in a slightly different generation, and there were very few people of my age actually were doing it. There are, maybe the sort of a quarter of the number probably that were doing it in the 70s. And I felt a lack of community support from peers at that time. I didn't really realize it until I realized what other people had. Yeah. I just felt that there was no one else really doing what I was doing. And I mean, I got to the Soil Association by going to their events and their conferences every year and thinking, wow, this is amazing. There's some really inspiring people here. And so when these guys came to us and said, we need new people coming in, we're really worried about our industry and about what's going to happen to it.
Right.
So we set up, at the time, the first sort of phase of it was an apprenticeship scheme where we set up 2-year placements with growers and we ran a series of courses around it. And then it's gone through slightly different guises to the stage where we are now, where we provide a whole syllabus of training weekends over the year.
Wow, nice.
And it's not a massive scheme. We've had 80 plus people go through it over the 10 years. We've actually got around 20 people on it this year, which is our biggest intake. But actually, if you look at the number of organic growers in the UK, there's maybe 800 or 1,000. So it's roughly 10% have gone. If they all stayed in growing, we've got our succession effectively. But actually, even more than that, we've built around that scheme, we've built this community of growers. And one of the things that the people that have been through the scheme say is, we learned stuff and, we're better growers than we were. But actually what has been amazing about it is meeting the other community. People who are doing what we're doing. And a lot of them are still in touch. Some of them are not growing anymore. But they're still connected and they still have that deep understanding. And it really hit home for me where one of our very experienced growers, Ian Tolhurst, who's kind of like one of our gurus over here, and he said, what you've done with this is wonderful. He said, actually, it just gives me hope. And that was just a wonderful thing to hear, that these guys who basically had worked their whole life building something, building a market, building a movement, were really worried that the whole thing was just going to disappear. And so what it obviously wasn't just the Soil Association. We did it in collaboration with the growers and with other organisations. But it's been a great thing to be involved in. So
nice. Well, congratulations, because that's building the educational piece, that takes a lot of energy. But I think building the community is, I don't want to devalue the educational piece of it, but that's more important.
Well, and in a way, the education flows from that.
Yeah.
If you've got the community, and it's not just here's some other people doing what you're doing, but we're also connecting them to the experience growers. So suddenly, and I remember, when I first just started going to these conferences, and I'd see the Ian Tolhurst and these other people, and I'd be terrified to go and talk to them. I don't want to make myself sound like a total idiot. I don't know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Whereas now they've been to their farm, they've had a chat, they've sat around the bonfire with them.
Yep.
So they're not afraid to talk to them. So suddenly that flow of information and learning is made much easier.
Exactly. So what drives you?
Until I've been with the Soil Association 10 years, but until that, I'd moved around quite a lot. I hadn't stayed very long in I'd stay for 2 or 3 years in a job and then move on. And I think part of it is I get bored quite easily, which took me a while to realize. And I think really what drives me is I like doing new, interesting stuff. Mm-hmm. I love people. And I love food. And so it's kind of, I tend to grab opportunities that come my way. I'm not very strategic in how I go about my life. The book is a classic, well, not this book so much, but the first book that I wrote, which is a book on compost for children. It was just chance. I was talking to someone about another book that we were endorsing from the Soil Association. And she says, do you fancy writing a book for us? I was like, oh, crikey, I've never written a book, but yeah, why not? And things come up, and I think you just have to say yes to everything and work out whether you can do it along the way. So I have, I'm obviously passionate about gardening and about food and all the rest of it. And I think I just like talking about what I'm passionate about. My wife often tells me to shut up at dinner parties she says, oh, you're not going on about gardening again, are you?
Of course we are.
Okay. No, they're interested, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what we do, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I just feel very lucky in a way to been able to do for my life what I enjoy doing and to have been given opportunities to do that. So
I call that blessed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I love what you said. You said just say yes to everything.
It's a kind of foolish confidence sometimes, and I won't pretend that I've succeeded at everything. But,
that's okay. That's how we learn.
I have a general belief, and I think actually, I owe it to my parents who gave us all that confidence in a way. Most people, given the right circumstances, can achieve most things, in my opinion.
Yeah.
What holds most people back is either lack of opportunity or lack of confidence. There was a program in this country called Faking It. I don't know if you had it over there, where they sort of took some random person and put them in some career or skill that they had no experience of, and they were given 6 weeks of really intensive training.
Wow!
From the best people in that, whether it was horse riding or ice skating or graffiti art or whatever it happened to be, and then at the end of that 6 weeks, they had to fool somebody in that profession that they knew what they were doing. So they had to enter a competition or do something. And what amazed me was how often they managed to blag it.
Yeah.
After 6 weeks.
Yeah. And
it's sort of in a way that reinforced it. If you're given an opportunity, obviously you have to have a little bit of whatever skill is required for that, but not that much. Given 6 weeks of the best training, you can mostly blag it, and that to me says quite a lot about what people can achieve.
Yeah. Nice. So I'm all about education, and I have to know, is there a book that's been influential for you in this process in your life?
I'm still struggling with the book because there's so many books. There's a book actually that's just, I think, being republished, which is a book on salads by Joy Larkham. I don't know if you ever come across Joy Larkham.
I haven't.
Probably getting on a little bit now. She probably wouldn't want me to say that, but it was first published, I think, in the 80s, possibly the 70s or 80s, and at the time it was the Bible, the salad Bible. And reading that actually changed my perception of growing. So the course that I did, the horticultural course, was a relatively conventional standard course. It looked at food production it wasn't an entirely food production course. And it was, here's some apples and here's some cabbages and, there's a few crops that you look at. it wasn't very food orientated. It was quite process orientated. And I'd come from that world of wanting to eat amazing stuff and always, often having fresh ingredients at home. But actually then to this whole world effectively of salads that was opened up in front of you. Going,
nice.
Wow, and that's just, I guess, one example of then, looking and in a way, actually more even than books. I mean, there are two other people actually that have written stuff that may not be that well known in the States. There's one called Charles Dowding, who I definitely recommend your listeners look up. And he's written a series of books. One is called the Winter Vegetable Book, and he's very into no-dig. He's got a really good no-dig system.
Yeah.
But he's a really inspirational gardener. And then the other one who I mentioned earlier is Ian Tolhurst, who comes from a more sort of commercial angle, but he's written a book called Growing Green. He runs a vegan organic system. He has no animal inputs at all on, on a relatively large farm. But he just tries so many new things all the time. Every year he's trying some new system. And for me, one of the real perks of my job at the Soil Association is I get to go and visit these people. I'd probably do it in my spare time. And instead I'm getting paid to go and stand and listen to these people. So in a way, almost more than those books, it's some of those people. And one of the things I would really urge people setting up a community garden to do is to try and find some local vegetable or fruit growers, and whether it's go and volunteer with them for a while or just go and visit them, find an open day, and actually just talk to them, and within the space of a half an hour conversation you'll probably pick up as much information as you would from reading a couple of books.
Plus it's local information.
Not mine, obviously. Exactly, it's local information.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing your experience with us today, Ben. It has been a treat getting to chat with you.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. So how can our listeners get a hold of you?
Well, I'm on Twitter at Ben_Raskin. That's probably the best way. I do have a website, but I'm supposed to be getting a new website soon. So I'm not necessarily going to point people in the direction of my website at the moment, which is a little bit out of date.
Well, your book is the Community Gardening Handbook, the guide to organizing, planting, and caring for a community garden. It is by Lumina Media. And I'm sure it's available on Amazon and at your local bookstore. You can also find show notes from today's podcast at urbanfarm.org/Ben Raskin. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us on the Urban Farm Podcast. Do you want to save money at the grocery store, eat more organic, whole foods, cultivate food security, and feel more connected to the earth? If so, then growing your own food is a no-brainer. You wouldn't believe how many people come to me claiming that they can't grow their own food. They think they don't have enough space, that they're too busy, or that they simply don't have what it takes. Perhaps you've fallen for one of these gardening myths. If you think you can't grow food, or if you think the only food that you have access to is what you buy in the grocery store, I have a life-changing webinar that you need to see. It's free and will help you unearth your inner gardener. I've helped thousands of people just like you learn to grow their own food, and I'm speaking from my own experience when I say that with the right knowledge in place, there is no such thing as a black thumb. With this webinar, you can begin making your garden dreams come true and start growing delicious, nutritious food for your family. Just text GARDEN to 44222 or go to iwanttogarden.com and you will receive our free webinar about the 7 key factors you need to know to grow your own food. Remember, that's GARDEN to 44222 or iwanttogarden.com.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen 3 days a week for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.